What type of this counterattack from Israel could be on Iran?
Again, we are witnessing the Middle East to be standing on the brink of a major regional war. Israel, as I earlier pointed out, is a nuclear weapon state. It has, according to international assessments, anywhere between 100 to 150 nuclear weapons. The real punch and the muscle and the might which Israel continues to flaunt throughout Middle East is its air power. The most likely weapon system is going to be a combination of F-35 fighters and F-15 fighters. The second advantage that Israel has is the close support from the US Air Force. The three types of targets which are being considered right now at the highest level in Israel are the military targets. A second set of target, which is more strategic and more critical and escalatory, could be the oil facilities of Iran. The most critical and sensitive target, which is also being considered and being recommended by some hardliners within Israel, is to take out some of the important nuclear facilities of Iran. In case its nuclear facilities are targeted by Israeli Air Force, then it will provide it the ultimate justification by citing a national security threat to exit the non-proliferation treaty.
A statement coming from Iranian leadership that in case Israel attacks Iran, then Iran has the capability to strike against the US destroyer in the Persian Gulf. To what extent this type of conflict is possible?
This message, this diplomatic message to the US was very critical in order to convince Washington that the Iranians want to deal with Israel on its own.
Whenever we have seen and analyzed American diplomacy in the Middle East, instead of bringing peace, it has brought more hostility and more insecurity and more escalation of the war.
Any great power or superpower considers diplomacy not just as a means to promote peace. It considers diplomacy as an expression of its power. So these are the realities of international politics, Mateen Saab,
Yes.
unfortunately.
What is way forward for peace?
No matter how noble, how peaceful, how useful you are as an individual or as a country or as a state, the weak countries are at the mercy of an aggressor. Any country, it is not about Pakistan. Any country without a strong air force is at the mercy of an aggressor.
Wonderful.
So Pakistan must build an air force second to none. Yes. So that is the wisdom, that is the profound strategic wisdom of our founder that you can see in the history of last 76 years.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers, as we have done earlier programs, which were meant to give you updates regarding Middle East crisis, and we tried our level best to give you an insightful information about the latest happenings in Middle East, in Lebanon, and the Iranian missile attack on Israel. Now, Iran has already completed its mission of missile attack on Israel. So there have been unconfirmed reports of different type of destructions inside Israel. Iran had already announced that its target was military bases inside Israel. And some of the videos have confirmed that there have been greater damage to some of the military bases in Israel. So in response to this, Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Netanyahu said that Israel will give a calculated response to Iranian missile attack. What type of this Israeli counterattack on Iran would be? And at the same time, There are other developments that Israeli bombardment in Gaza is continuing. And short while ago, Israeli fighter jets have also carried out air strikes inside Lebanon, particularly in Lebanese capital Beirut, on certain specific targets. And in last 24 hours, the Israeli Air Force has also carried out strikes inside Syria on Russian military bases. So situation is quite complex. At the same time, diplomacy is also in action to de-escalate this particular conflict, to discuss these all and all strategic matters related to the Middle Eastern crisis and possible response from Israel to Iran. Today, we are joined by strategic affairs analyst, expert of international relations, Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali Sahab. Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali Sahab, very warm welcome to program Inside in V News English.
Thank you for having me, Mateen Sahab.
Iran has already accomplished its military mission, whatever it had announced earlier, in the aftermath of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, that it will attack. But it took longer time in giving that response to Israel. But immediate reason was when Mr. Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated and Israel made attack on Lebanon, then Iran made commitment, and that commitment it fulfilled by attacking military bases inside Israel. So Israel is now contemplating a response, which other words, counterattack on Iran. Please share your thoughts. What type of this counterattack from Israel could be on Iran? There are reports that Israel may be targeting Iranian nuclear sites or certain military bases. Dr.
Sahab, thank you for having me on your show. A very important topic at a very important time, I think, for the world peace and security, and particularly for the Middle Eastern security situation. Again, we are witnessing the Middle East to be standing on the brink of a major regional war. And I think the entire international community is witnessing these developments with bated breath. In regard to your question about the possible targets in Iran, which Israel could consider hitting, I think let's first compare the strengths and weaknesses of Iran and Israeli defense capabilities. You know, Iran is more than 2,152 kilometers away from Israel.
Exactly.
And its most potent weapon, as per its strategy, are two. Its most potent weapons are definitely its ballistic and cruise missile program. For the same reason that it was developed for two reasons. First, it did not have a very advanced and highly sophisticated air force and very modern fighters. So these cruise missile and ballistic missile developments indicate that first, Iran tried to indigenize these, and secondly, build a large stockpile of these ballistic and cruise missiles in order to compensate for a very effective and modern and sophisticated air force. The second reason was distance. It always saw Israel as its preeminent adversary in the region. And it is cognizant that it is more than 2,152 kilometers away. So it needs to develop intermediate range ballistic missiles which could reach Israel. So these are the two reasons why it developed a very advanced ballistic missile capability. And according to recent reports, it has thousands of ballistic missiles stockpiled deep underground in case of further escalation. The second part of the Iranian strategy is the support for different militant organizations, ranging from Houthis to Hezbollah to Hamas to Al-Aqsa Brigade and several others, including some in Syria and Iraq, because these non-state organizations allow Iran to influence the security environment of other countries without getting Iran directly involved in any conflict. So this is what we see as the major capability of Iran. if you compare it with Israel, Israel is a nuclear power. It has nuclear weapons. So the most important thing. And it is very embarrassing and frustrating for Israel because Iran continues to use these militant organizations with impunity over the last few years, and also has used its ballistic missiles twice against Israel, despite Israel having a nuclear capability, which is very embarrassing and frustrating for the Israeli defense planners. But when you look at the Israeli capability, Israel, as I earlier pointed out, is a nuclear weapon state. It has, according to international assessments, anywhere between 100 to 150 nuclear weapons. But most of its ballistic missile program is not very large and not very extensive. It is primarily designed to carry the nuclear weapons of Israel. It has some submarines which also carry nuclear weapons.
Warheads.
Although these submarines are conventionally powered, but carry nuclear weapons. The real punch and the muscle and the might which Israel continues to flaunt throughout Middle East is its air power and its armored formations, which it has used extensively since 1967 war, in 1973, in 1982, in 2006, and now again since last year. So, the Air Force is equipped with the world's most advanced aircraft, including the F-35 stealth fighter, which normal radars cannot detect. Its air defense system it also consists of very sophisticated, multi-layered ballistic missile defense system like Arrow 2 and 3, the intermediate range, missile defense system in the form of David Sling, which can shoot down missiles up to the range of 300 kilometers, whereas the longer, more than 1,500 to 2,000 kilometer range missiles are targeted by Arrow 3 and Arrow 2, whereas the short range and slower missiles and rockets, like the Katyusha rockets, which Hezbollah frequently uses, are mostly targeted by Iron Dome, which has a range of up to 70 kilometers. So this is a multi-layered air defense system. Their air force consists mainly of three fighters. The F-16s provide the air defense system to intercept any hostile fighters. The F-15s have a much longer range, a much higher speed, and much bigger payload carrying capacity. And let me remind you that in 1981, when Israeli Air Force destroyed the French-supplied nuclear reactor of Iraq, the mission was carried out by 8 F-16s and 6 F-15 fighters, which dropped a total of 16 2,000-pound bombs on the Iraqi nuclear reactor. So they have experience of such precision strikes, and this is the advantage that the Israeli Air Force has. The second advantage it has is the close support and assistance provided by the United States, not just in terms of weapons, arms, aircraft, ammunition, but also
support. Exactly.
Yes, and now coming to the last part of your question, what specific weapon system and method they can use to target Iran? I think the most likely weapon system is going to be a combination of F-35 fighters and F-15 fighters, because F-35 fighters have an advantage of being stealthy, and they are difficult to detect on surface-to-air missile radar systems, whereas the F-15 has a much bigger payload carrying capacity and much longer range than any other aircraft in the Middle East. And the second advantage that Israel has is the close support from the U.S. Air Force. The Israeli Air Force cannot go all the way to Iran, bomb the targets, and come back without having a mid-air refueling capacity. Now, the critical question is, will the United States Air Force provide Israel the
That
mid-air refueling capacity over Iraqi or Syrian airspace or not. That is going to be a very critical factor, because if Israel deploys its own mid-air refueling capacity, its own mid-air refueling aircraft, then there is a chance of them being shot down. So they need to be escorted, and they need to completely dominate and close the airspace of Syria and Iraq in order to use their airspace, and Israel will need that these two airspaces are available for going all the way to Iran and coming back. Now, coming to the targets, the three types of targets which are being considered right now at the highest level in Israel are the military targets. It could be the missile launch sites. It could be the ballistic missile storage sites of Iran, or it could be the air bases of Iran from which a future retaliatory strikes could be launched. A second set of target, which is more strategic and more critical and escalatory, could be the oil facilities of Iran, because Israel can build an argument that it is the oil money which Iran is using to support and sponsor these militant organizations. So it could be a potential target, but it will be more escalatory and damaging. The most critical and sensitive target, which is also being considered and being recommended by some hardliners within Israel, is to take out some of the important nuclear facilities of Iran. As I earlier pointed out, you know very well, Israel has the experience of destroying nuclear facilities of Iraq in 1981 and Syria in 2007. So it has the experience, it has a reputation, and for the last 40 years, they have been looking for an opportunity to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. So I think despite President Biden's call an attempt to persuade Israel not to target the Iranian nuclear facility, I think it will be considered as a potential target, but its consequences can be extremely, extremely dangerous, because that could force Iran to exit from non-proliferation treaty and actually announce that as a result of an existential national security threat, it is forced to consider weaponizing its nuclear capacity.
Do you think Iran has reached to that level where it can break this NPT and can announce that it has achieved the nuclear facility for military purpose?
I think it's a very important question. I have extensively studied the technical, legal aspects of Iranian nuclear program. And let me tell you that according to International Atomic Energy Agency assessment, when the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, was signed in 2015, let me tell you that the upper limit on the quantity of enriched uranium that Iran was allowed to keep in 2015. Today, after 9 years, Mateen Saab,
yes,
the current capacity is 23 times more than what it had 9 years ago. That is the International Atomic Energy Agency capacity assessment, that the Iranian current capacity to produce enriched uranium is 23 times more than what it was allowed in 2015 as part of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as Iran nuclear deal. And actually, by unilaterally exiting the Iran nuclear deal, the US has actually failed to prevent Iran from advancing its nuclear program. And also the sanctions on Iran from the US have not really had much effect. And the evidence of that is that when the US withdrew from Iran's nuclear deal, its oil exports were around $75 billion. And today, Iran is exporting up to $90 billion worth of oil. So these sanctions, these unilateral sanctions have failed to, coerce Iran or also to persuade it from giving up its nuclear program. What I'm trying to tell you is, in case its nuclear facilities are targeted by Israeli Air Force, then it will provide it the ultimate justification by citing a national security threat to exit the non-proliferation treaty, which Iran signed during the Shah of Iran's government, and actually announce development of nuclear program. That's how the North Koreans did, and not much can be done about it. And the most important reality is that today its nuclear enrichment capacity is 23 times more than what it was 9 years ago, and its breakout capacity is also much more, which means it will require a few weeks for Iran to produce a nuclear weapon in case its political leadership decides to do that. It has not decided to do that, according to International Atomic Energy Agency. But once its nuclear sites are directly targeted, it is possible that the Iranian nuclear decision and policy could change, and they could review their traditional stance and consider weaponizing their nuclear capacity, which will have a very serious and unfortunate consequences for the non-proliferation regime, and will be an evidence that the failure of nuclear diplomacy and the escalation of the current conflict forced Iran to consider reviewing its nuclear policy.
Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali sir, we have also seen a statement coming from Iranian leadership that in case Israel attacks Iran, then Iran has the capability to strike against the US destroyer in the Persian Gulf. To what extent this type of conflict is possible, that in retaliation Iran would be hitting and striking at US destroyer? So, and the second aspect, this will, of course, this would be a bigger escalation of this war.
That's a very important question, Mateen Saab. Let me remind you there are three factors which are very important to consider whether US will get directly involved in the current Middle Eastern crisis or not. When Iran launched its missile attack against Israel, it has been confirmed that Iran took China and Russia into confidence, and through a back channel, a message was conveyed to the US as well that this is a retaliation after the assassination of Ismail Hania and Hassan Nasrallah, and this is not aimed at any US interest or US facility or US base. This message, this diplomatic message to the US was very critical in order to convince Washington that the Iranians want to deal with Israel on its own. And it was sort of a warning from Tehran that if US provides defensive support and measure to Israel, that is acceptable, that is tolerable. But what is not acceptable for Tehran is if the US helps or participates in any attack from Israel or directly on the Iranian soil or facilities. In that case, such messages that Iran will be forced to then target the US bases, the US interests, the US oil facilities in the Middle East, which are also soft targets and vulnerable. So that is something that perhaps really worries people in Washington. And you would recall, similarly, in case of the Ukraine-Russia war, US has been actively supporting Ukraine and providing them all sorts of weaponry, but they are not getting directly involved in any combat operations against Russia in order to not provoke Russia into harming the US interests. Similar is the case in the Middle East, that Iran has given a clear signal that it is taking revenge for the assassination of Ismail Hania and Hassan Nasrallah, and it is only directed against the military targets of Israel. So it does not expect any other country to get involved. Otherwise, Iran will consider both directly and indirectly attacking those countries which helped Israel in carrying out a possible and likely attack on Iranian soil and interests.
Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali Saab, another question related to the American support and diplomacy to Israel. Whenever we have seen and analyzed American diplomacy in the Middle East, instead of bringing peace, it has brought more hostility and more insecurity and more escalation of the war. So why it has been so? Because United States always believe that it is working globally for peace, not for destruction. But in the Middle East, whenever any move initiative comes in support of Israel, there is more instability. Dr. Saab.
Mateen Saab, let me tell you frankly that any great power or superpower considers diplomacy not just as a means to promote peace. It considers diplomacy as an expression of its power. Diplomacy is an expression of power. It can have different objectives. It can have objectives such as isolating your adversary, building a coalition against it. It can be used to coerce or sanction and threaten other countries. It can be used to send a warning, a strategic signal, and force and coerce that country into changing its policy. For example, last year, we are almost about a year from the current conflict started in Gaza on 7th October. You would recall the US Secretary of State made several visits to Middle East. So they were not aimed at achieving peace. They were aimed at ensuring that Israel gets all the support from the European countries. The second objective was that the Arab and other Muslim countries do not support Iran and Hamas. That was the other diplomatic objective. And the third objective was at the multilateral forums, such as United Nations Security Council, vetoing those UN Security Council resolutions which were calling for ceasefire, including one tabled by your friend Ambassador Mateen Haider. So diplomacy was used, as I argued, at both multilateral and bilateral level to isolate Iran, to prevent Muslim countries and Arab countries from supporting Hamas and Iran, and building a coalition and encouraging European partners to support Israel, and preventing the other international community from passing a resolution calling for ceasefire in the UN Security Council, or basically which tantamounts to protecting Israel's right to carry on the current conflict. So these are the realities of international politics, Mateen Saab, yes. Unfortunately.
So, Dr. Saab, as you have given an analysis that what possible targets in Iran could be, so you have also given about an analysis of diplomacy in action. But at the same time, diplomacy is in action, but at the same time, Israel is still in an action. What Israel now wanted in Lebanon, because airstrikes are continuing in Lebanon and in south of Lebanon. At the same time, in last 24 hours, more than 100 people have been martyred in Gaza by the Israeli airstrikes.
Mateen Saab, in short, I would say the conflict has already spread, although at different levels of intensity, at least to 4 countries. First is again Gaza and West Bank, which are part of Palestine. The second front, which started 3 days ago when Israel launched a ground offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israeli Air Force has been carrying out airstrikes, thousands of miles away in Yemen as well, against the Houthi targets. And as you rightly pointed out in your introduction as well, there have been several very intense and frequent bombing campaigns, almost daily basis, by the Israelis against Syria. Day before yesterday, they carried out bombing against the 3 border crossings between Lebanon and Syria in order to prevent logistical and other military supplies from Iran and Syria from reaching Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yesterday, they bombed their military bases, and today they carried out an air attack on a military base, on an air base, which Israel believes is carrying out, bringing in Iranian supplies for the fighters fighting Israel. So basically, we see a lot of military activity taking place, and I think it works both ways. On one side, Israel is trying to isolate Iran by weakening all those military organizations, militant organizations, which are supported by Iran, whether it is Houthis, whether they are Hezbollah, whether they are Al-Quds Brigade, whether it is Ansarullah or Hezbollah. So they are trying to weaken them and damage them significantly in order to isolate and weaken Iran before there is a direct and major confrontation at the bilateral level. But on the other hand, it could also be argued from the Irani perspective that before launching this large-scale missile attack on Israel, it waited. And why it waited? It waited because it waited till the time that US and Israel got entangled at least on 4 different countries, on 4 different fronts, in order to prevent US and Israel from concentrating and accumulating their military might wholly and solely against Iran. So it could be argued the other way as well, that Iran made sure that the ground invasion had begun in Lebanon by Israel, and it was confident that Hezbollah will give a very tough time to the Israeli ground forces. And according to latest reports, yesterday more than 8 Israeli soldiers were killed in ambush by Hezbollah fighters, and there are more news of casualties today as well. So Israel knows that in the form of Hezbollah and the ground offensive, it faces a very stiff resistance, and they have already reinforced their earlier attacking formations with another division. So there are at least 2 division force of Israel deployed against Hezbollah on the Lebanese border, and it has also led to about 60 to 80,000 Israelis being evacuated from the northern Israel in order to save them from the frequent rocket attacks of Hezbollah. So basically, Israel's objective is to, clear at least 30-kilometer range air territory close to the Lebanese border, so that Hezbollah is not able to carry out rocket attacks against the Israeli population. But I think it will not be very easy for 2 reasons. First, Hezbollah's strength is to fight on its own territory in Lebanon, which it knows very well, and it has an advantage, and it can carry out guerrilla attacks, and this can be a very long and costly war for Israeli forces. And secondly, even if they secure 30 kilometers of border region, Hezbollah can acquire longer range rockets to hit Israeli population and military bases from a greater distance. So that's not a problem. So I don't think this is a very wise and successful strategy that Israel is pursuing by invading Lebanon.
So what country has been missed from our discussion and from your very insightful information, that is role of Yemen in the entire conflict. The certain Yemeni bases have been attacked by Israeli Air Force, and the purpose was because the Houthis in Yemen used to fire missiles all the way from Yemen to Israel. So please enlighten our viewers. What is the role of Yemen in the entire conflict? And despite bombing, not only by the Israeli, but in the past, American and coalition forces have also bombed Yemen. But there have been, but its determination was never shaken. It continued to pose threat not only to Israel, but also to the trading corridor, strategic trading corridor?
I think that's a very important question, Mateen Saab, because I think the geostrategic location of Yemen and the missile capacity of the Houthis are very significant, not just for this particular conflict, but for the entire international maritime traffic that passes through the Red Sea, and but also for the entire international, at least a third of the world energy trade. Because if the Houthis are able to significantly damage those ships which are doing trade and bringing in oil and critical supplies to Israel, that can affect the war stamina of Israel at the strategic level. But at the international level, it can significantly raise the international oil and gas prices, which can be very harmful for the international energy security. And that is something which is not something limited or restricted to US or Israel. That will affect the whole world, including Pakistan, because we are heavily dependent on oil and gas imports from the Middle East. And if the prices are receive a significant increase, which are already increasing in the last few days, then our fuel import bill can increase, which can seriously affect Pakistan's efforts aimed at managing its economic challenges.
Professor, one thing that is also strategically important, that Russia is a direct stakeholder in the entire situation. Likewise, France. Russia and France both are members of the Security Council. France also enjoys traditionally strong, strategically important ties with Lebanon. And the Russia's role is also not secret. So how do you see the role of Russia on the one hand, and on the other hand, France being an old friend of Lebanon? So these two countries being member of the Security Council, what do you think, what role they can play in de-escalating the situation?
I think this is a very important question, because Russia and France are both permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And but they are going to play a major role, because Russia, along with China, are expected to call for peace and de-escalation in the Security Council. And I think Iran might receive some diplomatic sympathy from Moscow, whereas China is expected to be ambivalent but call for peace and resolving this current crisis and managing the conflict through a ceasefire. France, I think, is a significant actor, because it traditionally has significant influence over Syria and Lebanon. But its current influence is questionable, because it has already deployed a major helicopter carrier in the Mediterranean Sea, waiting for the orders to evacuate French citizens from Lebanon in case the fighting escalates further in Lebanon. Secondly, their president, Emmanuel Macron, made a very interesting statement yesterday. He said that Europe is no longer a major priority of the US. And he said that the major priority of the US is now China. And there are other priorities. So Europe is no more US major priority. So Europe should, try to build its own security arrangement and reduce its dependence on the US. So that is something very important. But that is characteristic of the French thinking, because French has always aspired to be a leading European power by reducing the US influence in the European politics. That has been the traditional French approach towards European politics. But regarding Russia, as an afterthought, I'll add two more points. That Russia, the Iranian conventional forces, Air Force, Navy, and Army are heavily dependent on Russian defense equipment. Most of their equipment right now is of Russian origin. Secondly, the nuclear reactor that they have was also provided under IAEA by Russia. And thirdly, in Syria, when there was a major conflict going on against Daesh, Russia was a major player, and its Air Force played a very active, direct role. And according to a former Russian Air Force chief, the Russian Air Force carried out no less than 44,000 bombing sorties against Daesh only in the Syrian front. And the Navy was also deployed in the Mediterranean Sea to provide missile support and air defense against any bombing and attacks of the Bashar al-Assad government. So in the Middle Eastern region, I think Russia views Syria as its major traditional long-standing ally. They still have some major bases there, which Iran is currently using to provide and supply, bringing ammunition and arms for further supply to Hezbollah. So I think Russia is going to be a major player, but due to its preoccupation in the Ukrainian conflict, I don't expect a direct involvement, but I expect some material support for Iran and its militant proxies from Russia.
Thank you so much indeed. But finally, Dr. Saab, keeping in view your, alhamdulillah, very strategically very important discussion and insightful information, precisely what is way forward for peace in the entire region?
I think the oldest principle of international politics and security, Mateen Saab, is that, no matter how noble, how peaceful, how useful you are as an individual or as a country or as a state, the weak countries are at the mercy of an aggressor. And that reminds me of a very famous saying. That reminds me of a very famous saying that Pakistan's founder, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, made when he made his first visit to Pakistan Air Force Academy, Risalpur. He said something which is prophetic and profound and timeless, and that can be applied to the current situation of Middle East. He said that any country, it is not about Pakistan, any country without a strong air force is at the mercy of an aggressor.
Wonderful.
So Pakistan must build an air force second to none.
Second,
and Alhamdulillah,
still find this sentence over there.
Yes. So that is the wisdom, that is the profound strategic wisdom of our founder, that you can see in the history of last 76 years, all those countries without a strong air force, whether it is Palestine, whether it is Lebanon, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Libya, whether it is Yemen, whether it is Syria, all these countries without a strong air force have been victims and at the mercy of the aggressors throughout history. That is the lesson of history.
Exactly. Thank you so much indeed, Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali Saab, for this extremely valuable, insightful discussion, analysis on the latest happenings in the Middle East. And particularly the last remarks and the analysis that you made, that without a strong air force, any country in the world or in the region would be nothing, would be dependent on the aggressor. Therefore, and strong air force is the strong defense. And that was the message for Pakistan given by Qaeda-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Rahmatullah Alayh, which Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali Saab has quoted. Once again, Dr. Saab, thank you so much for sparing time to speak to Program Inside in Videos English. And dear viewers, till our next program, goodbye and Allah Hafiz from studios.